Hi, everyone. Welcome back to I've Been Thinking with your host, Brianna. That's me. You know, one of the things that I have been feeling very fortunate about over the last several weeks is that as we have more and more of these conversations, I just feel like we're pulling people into our world and into our platform who are helping us think about sort of what it means to be living in this world in this moment, both as just a human being trying to thrive, but also as an artist and as a creative. And I have someone today that I think you're just going to love. I think she's so lovely. And I think that, I often say I try to bring people to our platform that I think you will feel the same way that I do, which is that she's a lovely individual, so genuine, and such a lovely person to have on the platform. Her name is Ashley Versher. She's a TV, film, and theater actress. We connected on Instagram, which, as far as I know, is the only way to connect with people at this time. So we connected on Instagram and we had a conversation, and she's been so kind to say yes to being on the platform. So everyone, welcome Ashley. How are you doing today?
Hi, I am really good.
Good. Good. I love that. That's like the best first step. Like I'm feeling good, feeling hydrated, like
Yeah, I've
rested,
got one.
all of the things.
I feel that made me feel very vulnerable to say that.
I
Um,
believe it. Before we jump into the conversation, tell people just a little bit about who you are.
yeah. So my name's Ashley Versher. I am a California born and bred girl. So that's like a little important piece about my quirks. I'm originally, currently I was living in New York City, and actually currently I am in Easley, South Carolina.
Wow.
Yep. It's a small town.
Yeah.
Small. I have been here for about 2 weeks, and I have met all of the neighbors
Right. Exactly.
over
That
here.
sounds about right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But it's been, and their dogs. So that's been really nice. I'm an actress, and I do, all the things that we actors and artists do, and I also do my best to support people behind the scenes. So currently, I'm working as a production manager on a show that opens today online. Today, what is that? June 26th,
Mhm.
called The Roundtable Play. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me.
I love the fact that you're in South Carolina. Family, my mother's family is actually from Beaufort, South Carolina.
Yeah.
So when you said South Carolina, I was like, yep, I know that. So you've met everyone,
Mhm,
like
mhm,
every single person in the
mhm.
neighborhood you've met and like have actual relationship with now.
Yes, like I know why they're here.
Yep.
I know their relationship with the people who live in the house if they don't live in the house,
Hmm.
like long term. I know people's allergies.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing. It's so amazing. And you compare that to the fact that like in New York I saw my neighbor the other day and I was like, has that person always lived in that building in
Oh
that
yeah.
room, or like what's happening there? I totally understand that. Well, you and I had a conversation, a little while ago. And when we were talking, I explained to you sort of what I've been trying to do with this platform, which is
Mm,
really create a space for people to sort of navigate the conversation of what's happening in our country right now, but then also to amplify the voices of other actors and actresses and creatives in general. And so you and I were sort of talking about how do you conceptualize this moment that we're in, like with everything that's happening. How
right.
are you as a creative thinking about this whole idea of addressing systemic racism and bias and social justice? Like it's so much, but how are you sort of working through that?
I think I have like a couple of different layers. I think for me, like personally, the most important part of that is educating myself.
Hmm.
Like obviously I'm a Black woman, but just because I'm Black doesn't mean I know everything. It doesn't mean I know all of our history. It doesn't mean I know, excuse me, all of the ins and outs of systematic racism or the prison industrial complex. I learned about those things probably most in the most detailed way throughout college. And then just reading and interest and film a lot, I think you sparked a lot of my interest
Hmm.
when it came to that. But currently, I think the first step for me is educating myself. The second step has been just sharing a message that I know well and that I support and that I'm proud of. I would certainly consider myself a Black female feminist, or a Black woman who's a feminist. And so a lot of the things I care deeply to share come from that perspective. Also, I have friends of very various cultural backgrounds and ethnicities. So also, sharing a lot of information about allyship is important to me.
Yeah.
And these things feed me. I think reading all of these things and learning these things, they feed me. They feed my artist's like soul, and inspire me. And I think that in some of these during this time, it's very easy to be super overwhelmed, and I find myself exercising or letting that out via art.
Yeah.
And not necessarily the art that I am, that I'm known to do, which I think is a
Right.
really important thing for us creatives. I think it's important to uh, give yourself the space to take a step back and to express yourself artistically through what's going on in a different way than you normally would. So painting, creative writing, all of those things. And then I think it's also having those hard conversations is a big part of it. My husband looks like a Caucasian male, and he's fairly tall, and so that's a very specific perspective of privilege. So having those tough conversations about our lives and how we navigate the world differently,
Yeah.
and talking through that a lot has been the way that I've been going about it. And then, I think my favorite part is just the self-care part.
Which we cannot emphasize enough.
It's just like okay, I'm gonna like eat some red vines and watch what I call trash TV. And because it's awesome.
Right.
And just like sort of have my like momentary veg out, or pretend like I'm a mom escaping from my kids just for like 20 minutes and taking a bath with like,
Love
a
it.
glass of wine and a TV show, like Little Fires. That's what I was watching. It was great.
100%. Right. And I think, something that you said that I really think is so interesting, because I know that I've been doing it, but I didn't think that I realized I haven't been doing that consciously. And you just made me think about that, which is when you're an artist and you're a creative, expression is often through your art, but
Yeah.
it's not necessarily the art that you're known for, right? Like I'm a theater actress, and so I'm not necessarily utilizing those creative skills in this moment, but I am doing a lot more writing.
Yeah.
The podcast in and of itself is sort of a creative expression, and I find myself really loving, the design part and the all of that piece of it. And so I think you're right. We find ways to express ourselves creatively,
Yeah.
even though it's not the thing that like we are marketed as out in,
Yeah.
in our industry.
Yes, 100%. I think like even if you feel not, if you're an artist and you identify like that, or you identify as a creative, even if you don't feel capable, because I have a lot of friends who are like, things are so stressful for them that they cannot even pick up a script and read it, like friends who are actors. And I'm like, look, that's fine. And if you feel like you can't do anything, I think being an artist or creative is really a part of us. And so giving yourself the space to find those other things.
Hmm.
So picking up the artist way, as like, old school that might sound, it's a rock. I mean, picking up the artist way and going through, even if you just get through one section, or even if you just get through like week 1 and 2 and all you've done is journaling and maybe an artist day or not, and then you
Right?
get to week 3 and you're like, well, I'm not really doing this to my fullest. No, forget it. Just keep going.
Yeah.
And eventually, like, you will start to express yourself in really surprising ways. Like, I don't know, get a little weird,
And but the thing that I love about what you're saying is because there could be a real freedom to expressing yourself in a way without that judgment. So much of what we do is for judgment, for consumption. And
Yes.
so you're right, like this idea of like just do it, knowing that like nobody cares, nobody's watching, it's just for you. I think that is probably the most freeing gift you can give yourself as a
Oh
creator.
my God. Yes. And that is, you hit it. That is the thing about it is, it is just, I think it's an amazing like feeling to produce whatever kind of art and to not give a can I curse? I didn't
Yeah,
know.
of course.
Oh, okay. So not give a fuck what people think about
Right.
it. Like that, oh my God, that feeling
Which
is
is
like
the battle. Yeah, like that is the battle, right? For like
yes,
creatives, like to just do it and truly just do it because you want to do it.
yes. Like I was like feeling some kind of way a couple of weeks ago, and so I got like some paper and some paint, and I like used my hands because I'm a very physical actor, I would say, and I used my hands and just made something on like a piece of cardboard. It doesn't have to be something I frame. It doesn't have to be something I keep. Like I gave it to my niece because she builds little buildings in her room. I was like,
Mhm.
here, you can have this thing that I made because I
Right.
don't. I just it was an ex- it was something that allowed me to express what I was going through and to get through that because what is happening is so overwhelming and
Yeah.
so stressful. I think that a lot of us have not yet realized how stressed we are.
Totally.
Um,
I totally agree with you. I think that we are just and I won't speak in generalizations. I'll say for myself that
yeah.
I have come to that realization of like, oh, I'm just realizing how overwhelming this is.
Mhm.
Because I think in the midst of, you and I talked about this previously, but like the minute that the George Floyd murder happened, it was like a match was lit and we were consumed
Yeah.
by so much information and so much, content. And I remember saying to you that like I had to intentionally take a step back because
Yeah.
everything that you see, I think artists have a predisposition to be more empathetic. So it was literally like I was being traumatized on a second by
Mhm.
second basis.
Mhm.
So taking a step back from that. But I realized over the last week or so, I was like, I'm feeling this in a way that I wasn't feeling this a couple of weeks ago. And I think it's because it's finally settling in,
Yes.
in, in my body of like what we've seen over the last several weeks is traumatic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to
Yeah.
be an artist and try to navigate that feels really difficult.
Yes. And I also can imagine because I think like if you there's all varying types of artists. If you've gone through like going to some form of art school, you have been taught also that you have a responsibility. So I
Mhm.
think it's also trying to navigate that
Yeah.
and in a safe way for yourself. And I totally agree. When I found out about George Floyd, I didn't my husband told me actually, and I was like I read a quick article or quick blurb about it and I was like I'm gonna go take a shower because
Yeah.
I was like, I I'm not in a place to process that right now.
Right. Right.
And for myself as well, it took me weeks to get through to that point where I was like really processing what happened, starting to really processing what's going on, and then because I am who I am, being probably my most ever active self on social media because I felt super empowered and inspired, and that it was extremely important that I could do my part in sharing my experience as a Black woman, as a Black person, and as a human being. Um, and 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 a lot of that had to do with the way that I felt about allyship and the way
Yeah.
that I felt about allies. And I had people text messaging me like, "Oh my God, hey, I'm so sorry that you have been going through this and that you have to live in this world." And it's like it's very nice, but it's also tricky because I don't know necessarily what to do with that.
Right. Right.
Whereas like I've also had where it's like, "Hey, listen, my husband and I were talking. We really would like to educate ourselves on this. Do you have a recommendation for some books? Like we have these books that we've already found, but do you have any recommendations?" And so going about it in that way. And then also I just want to say that educating yourself doesn't mean you got to pick the hard book to read.
Totally. Totally.
Like the new Jim Crow is a wonderful book. It is a pretty thick book, and I think you got to be prepared to read it.
Hmm.
So I think it's so fair and so okay to start where you feel comfortable starting. And that means starting even with novels that have Black leads in it. Like read Swing Time by Zadie Smith, like you can read that. And that is an education in and of itself of a Black female experience. Um, so those are the things that I think I've
Well,
been
and
doing.
even when you said that, I remember saying to someone, I was like, if you're not even someone who's prone to pick up a book, Netflix basically released a whole Black film education for you that, and you're already on Netflix 23 hours out of the day anyway. So like make a conscious choice that like I'm going to watch something today that is going to at least give me some point of reference
Yeah.
for the conversation, because I think that that's the piece that I have found to be interesting about this space, because and you alluded to this, it's like you're experiencing this moment in time as a Black person, as a brown person, and that comes with its own special set of
Mhm.
emotions and feelings and responsibilities to process. You add on top of that that there was this natural bleed over into into our industry,
Yeah.
right? Where all of a sudden there were these conversations happening about what does equity look like in our industry specifically. And I know every industry has been touched by this at this point, but I think in particular on social media, we started to see, at least I did, these actors of color who were being very transparent and open about what it meant to be Black and brown and navigating our
Mhm.
industry. And that in and of itself was both empowering and traumatic at the same time. And so you're looking at all of this happening. And I remember thinking, first, this is huge. Like, it's huge for us to be having this conversation out in the open, because I
Yeah.
think we've always been having these conversations. But then
Mhm.
the second thing I remember thinking is like, how do we move towards solution united, like as a community of people? Because there's there's so much that is riding on us being a part of fixing this industry, and yet it's big work that needs to be done, and to do it well, I think we have to be united as artists of color. Is there something that you think about as ways that we can really move towards solutions as a community?
Yeah, I think honestly, I think, and I'm, one thing that I can say is I do think that it has the possibility of being at minimum a two-tier process.
Hmm.
I think that one thing that has always been very important to me and very obvious based on my academic experience and my educational background, I went to a African American private Christian school from probably preschool through sixth grade, and that is a very one of a kind experience and very rare, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have learned since then, obviously I'm much older, but what I have learned about my education is that there there's a lot missing for Black America.
Yeah.
And that I think is where we need to go all the way back to. When it comes to everything across the board, even like we're talking about artists, doctors, lawyers, politicians, all of it. And but to focus on artists and our industry, that is where we need to go back to, because part of the issue is that these children do not have the same opportunities. They just do
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
And and as hard as parents work, as hard as PTAs work to bring dancers into the school to do the dance class once a week, to
Hmm.
bring music into the school, to have a music class where they learn to play the recorder at 7 and the keyboard at I think 6 or something like that. That's not enough. It's not
Yeah.
enough. I trained professionally as a classical violinist for a very long time. That is not even close to enough.
Right.
And so what I'm seeing is access and education. Access would be tier two, but education is the root of longevity. Like that is the thing that we have to fix for
Yeah.
the long haul. Like so that 20 years from now, I'm like, great. There's these students coming out of these schools who know what Shakespeare is, who know August Wilson, who know Black playwrights. Like
Right.
we can
Right.
get to that, but so that's step one for me, and that has a lot to do with call to action. Like the casting directors, thank you. I highly appreciate you promoting Black actors. Well, let's talk about what your casting office can do for the Black community. What's
Hmm.
there? What are the options? What are the opportunities? The same thing with agencies. How can you help that? Because there's agents everywhere. There's casting directors everywhere. How can you reach back into your community, into Black America, and how can you be effective? How can you teach and educate and
Yeah.
provide opportunities for these people? And then access to me has a lot to do with what has already kind of been happening in the industry because of, things like what Issa Rae did. And since that, across the board, there's been like these writing contests or these
Mm-hmm.
production contests or director like all of these things that are like, if you win, we'll give you like $5,000 and we'll help you shoot your first pilot or whatever.
Right.
I'm going to say, I think that those type of, we need twice as many of those opportunities that can be specifically catered to Black Americans.
Yeah.
People of color.
Right.
And I think that's where we start. And that's not to say that that's enough, but those are some pretty specific places that you can start. And I mean, hire a cultural diversity consultant.
Yeah. Like do
Hire
that
somebody.
foundational work, right?
Yeah.
Like that foundational work. And the thing that you're saying that that completely resonates with me and I completely agree with, which is that we know for a fact that an actor or a performer is not separated from their community, right? Like I bring with me everything that's important to me. And I think for a lot of us, we have come to expect very little from the systems that we're in. And so it's about having a bigger ask, which is like, yes, I do want you to support my career in this industry, but I'm not just a siloed performer. Like I bring with me things that I care about, things that I'm passionate about. And I would like to see you also invest in and care about those things as well.
Yes, 100%. And I recently did this meditation from it's a Black owned company by a Black woman called Black Girl in OM,
Mm-hmm.
OM, excuse me. And it was like a Black girl meditation. And I did it and I had this like moment of realization that like, oh my God, we have all been spending so much time trying to fit into a space that was not created for us.
Yeah.
And it was so beautiful to me to do that meditation and to listen to this Black woman's voice and to know that what I was doing and where I was going was made for me.
Yeah.
That
I love that.
moved me to the bottom of my soul. And I think that touches on what you're saying is that there are these spaces that we keep having to try to fit into, right? So we stop there and everyone stops there because we're just trying to fit in and trying to get
Yeah.
through to it.
Mm-hmm.
And what we are now asking good Lord, the South. Anyway, what we now want is for that little hole to be blown up.
Right.
That's what we want. So that's sort of the call to action, really. It's like I said in our first conversation, this is a yes and era.
Right.
Thank you
Right.
for sending me that email that you support me as a Black client on your talent list. But what else are you going to do?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What's next?
And holding people accountable. And I think sometimes when we hear this word accountability, it sounds like punitive and judgmental, and it's not. In the most loving way, it's about holding people accountable for the fact that if in fact I do matter to you, that we talk about all the time that love is an action, right? Like care is an action, and we want to see how that's going to bleed into the actions of where you put your time, where you put your resources.
Yeah.
And more importantly, I think to me, and something that you said that just like moved me when you were just saying this, it's about understanding that like that very narrow space that we've been aspiring to is not a big enough to hold the full volume of our abilities and identity, but also to aspire to maybe not try to fit into those small places.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like changing that idea, it's a beautiful thought, but it's also scary because you only know to aspire. to that thing.
Yeah.
And so everything other than that feels like nebulous and gray and like, what does it look like? And how do I path myself to the unknown, which I can get is totally scary.
Yes, and I would also imagine to some degree that these like allies, these casting directors and agencies who are professed allies also have that experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and not to them specifically, but I have friends who I know have been called into offices at their companies and they've been asked to consult, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like, look, guys, write a check, you
Right.
know, write a check, give somebody this job. This is a job.
This is a
Cultural,
job.
cultural
Right.
diversity consulting is a job. Like that needs to be a position that's everywhere because
Mm-hmm.
across the board, their help is needed when it comes to that. No matter like, what is it, BIPOC?
Right.
Across the board,
Right.
we need that.
I
So
and I actually think that's like a tangible idea. Like if that's a gap in your workforce, in your agency, in your production, like hire Black and brown artists to be consultants, like actually create the role, put dollars behind it, and like say, because this is the thing that I think people are afraid to admit. People are afraid to admit that they don't know where to start when
yes,
it comes to this, and they feel like by saying that it's in some way putting him in this category of like racist. It's like,
yes,
no, I don't expect you to understand what it means to be Black if you're not Black.
yes,
So you have to go and hire that expertise, which I think
yes.
is a real step that people can take.
Yes, it's a tangible step. Like,
Totally.
I was reading something the other day that was they were saying something to, profess their support of the Black Lives Matter movement, and it was the two words were tangible and susceptible or something like that, or sustainable,
Right.
tangible and
And
sustainable.
sustainable.
And I
Exactly.
was like, yes, that's what I'm talking about with what we're talking about is with access and education.
Hmm.
This like this very real possibility of a cultural diversity consultant. Like these are tangible and sustainable actions that can happen. Like, I don't know, donate to a PTA
Right.
at a school in Harlem. They don't have anything.
Yeah,
Um,
they're lacking what you actually have, and and when you say access, that's literally my love language because I everything that I feel passionate about is about increasing access
yeah,
because we know, and I believe this across the board, access to education, access to the arts, access to healthcare, like access to these things actually improves both the quality and the quantity
yes,
of your life. You actually live better and live longer when you
yes,
have access to these things. And I think you're right. Like it should be an expected part of the work that's being done,
yes,
and
yes.
holding them accountable for that I think is super important.
Yes, and I think that's what we need to do. It doesn't feel to me like the conversation has quite gotten to education.
Hmm.
It feels like we're just touching on access. Um,
Hmm.
but I think that this is definitely the direction that things need to head to some degree.
Yeah, I love that. When you were mentioning sort of these relationships that we have with our agents, with our production houses, all of those relationships, one of the things that I think I have noticed in this space that we're in,
Mhm.
I, in particular, and I know you do as well, we live in a very sort of diverse community,
Mhm.
right? Like by product of the work that we do and the lives that we lead, everyone, I have so many races and ethnicities and religions and cultures that are of people that consider my friends and my tribe. But then you find yourself in this moment where there's so much attention about diversity, equity, racial justice, and it feels challenging to the relationship, right? Like it feels like, how do we have these conversations and maintain our relationship, and people are asking questions out of honest like lack of knowledge, but then you don't know how to respond because you're feeling your feelings. Have
Yeah.
you found that to be true for
Oh
yourself?
God. Yeah. Yes. I mean, I think like honestly, to some degree, I felt like I really had to take a step back overall from all
Mm,
of my relationships, um, just to work through my own mental health and like self care, um, and finding ways to express myself and to let things out of
mm,
my body. And then I definitely felt like my friends who were not Black, I needed a minute from a
Yeah.
lot of them. And I think that that has to do with the fact that with everything that's going on and articulating everything that all of us are articulating on the internet, um, there's this tiny part that just feels like, God, like I feel like we're best friends and you know my secrets, but we are still surface.
Yeah.
And I think that's sad. It makes me sad to think about that. It makes me sad to think about um, that the fact that I have friends who have an extreme heightened level of privilege, who I have a surface level relationship with them when it comes to things like that.
Yeah.
You know, and that's hard. It's hard to work through those things. And I think it's okay. I think it's okay to take a step back and you know, you can love someone from a distance if you need to, for that time period. And then I think at some point it's probably necessary to have that conversation, to have those conversations. Like it's just hard. It's really hard because Black people are at such a disadvantage, and we've only started to talk about it. Like
Yeah.
we've only like started to talk about the beginning of it. Right now, Black people are trying to protect and preserve their bodies, their physical bodies.
Right. Like we are
Skin,
actually,
bone.
yeah, we're actually fighting to be alive
Yes.
and to be seen as like human and valuable. And we're still in that space.
Yes, but I honestly I would even challenge that a bit because I don't know if we're fighting we've hit all of those yet. I think we're
Hmm.
fighting for fucking air
Yeah.
and and the right to it. I think that's what we're fighting for. We're fighting for the respect of my physical body. Like I love
Right.
Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about this in his book Between the World and Me about how it's a challenge upon your physical body, your blood, sweat, tears, skin, hair.
Hmm.
It's a challenge upon all of that, and that's what we're fighting for. We haven't even gotten to the part where we start talking about I mean it's happening slowly, but we're not there where we're talking about the way that Black women experience America. We're not there where we talk about the relationship between Black women and Black men and how psychologically and sociologically it has been fucked by
Right.
history. We're not there.
Yeah.
We
We
haven't
and
had time to do that.
it's so, when you say that, it's so interesting because I'm thinking about what you're saying through the lens of how I approach the world. And I tend to be very solution fixated, right? Like when I hear a problem, I want to fix a problem.
Yeah.
And it's very uncomfortable for me to sit in the unknown, right?
Yeah.
Like I really want to get to, I do this in any sort of like space I'm in. I'm like, great, that's the problem. How are we going to fix it? And I have been, you said it just now, but I've been reminded through these conversations that we cannot fast forward into a space of solution just to make us feel better, right? Like
No.
as you said it beautifully, we're just not there yet, right? Like we're not to the place where we can like stick a bow on it and be like, yep, fixed it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is what I think so many of us want to be. We want to see the plan. We want to
Yeah.
see like the timeline and say like, okay, this is what we're working towards. And to your point, we haven't even been able to have these foundational conversations. And it's so interesting to me because as I'm thinking about that, to think about where we are so delayed in these sort of like revelations about where we are in this moment in time. And then to think about how our lives are so intertwined with so many different people and so many different perspectives.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm having sort of this aha moment of like, well, of course, it's going to be a breeding ground for like contentious conversations because
Yeah.
we've fast forwarded in one area, but we're delayed in this other, and
Yeah.
we're trying to live those two things at the same time.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, like right now, I've been reading the book Eloquent Rage and by Brittany Cooper, and I think one of the interesting things that she talks about, which sort of hits on what you just said, is how she says, and she's very opinionated, and I love her book. I love it. She says how come, and I'm not saying this verbatim, basically, how come when a Black man is murdered or brutalized by a police officer, Black women stand up, uh, organize protests, and get on the streets. But when it's a Black woman, that is not what happens on the other side. And that's not to say I definitely don't want to generalize. I
Of
am
course.
quoting
Yeah.
from a book. But it's a very interesting concept because to me, it's not just about, when you talk about that, it's not just about Black men. For me, it's about the overall issue with the perspectives of how people feel about Black women. Yeah. And I know people don't want to hear what I'm about to say, but
no, I definitely want to hear it.
yeah, I know you do. But white women in America, or across the world, are via the patriarchy are a prized pet.
Right.
That is how that functions. I think that's one of the best ways to explain it. And Black women are, how would I say this? Black women via the patriarchy are things, things that inanimate, what is it? Objects.
Inanimate objects. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that are owned. And that is the way that the patriarchy treats those two sets of people. Now, part of the problem is the patriarchy is the world, and you can gather that out of history if you just look at what everyone did.
Yeah. History supports that.
History supports this, yes, and you can gather that information via looking at the way that colonization worked, and relationships that have come out of that. I mean, so because of that, we're women, right? So we have, like, I have a lot of female friends. These conversations are so hard.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to say that, and you're trying to get someone to understand that, and you're trying to get someone to understand that while we're all fighting, like Black people, we're all fighting for our bodies. Like, no, I'm not saying anyone's fight is worse. I'm just saying that it wasn't not long ago that a Black woman's vagina was on display in a museum in England.
Right.
That wasn't very long ago.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
And this idea, no, I totally hear what you're saying. And I think it's interesting because one of the things that I'm thinking about as you're saying this is that when you look at the way history has treated, and you use this as an example, let's say white women versus Black women.
Yeah.
It has set us up to not be able to be united and to come together because there are areas of overlap of things that we care about, right? Yeah. Which is interesting because, and I think this is where I feel these sort of like natural tension points in relationship with people who are, not Black, which is like, there is a slight overlap in the things that we care about, right? Like we see things happen, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud, what happened in Central Park, I'm just using some of the recent ones. Yeah. And we see those things. And there's this overlap of concern of like not everyone, but like there's this general sense of like, wow, that's not right. Right. And so people have this moment where they feel like we agree on what this issue is and what this fight is. But then when you try to have those conversations, you realize like, oh no, we really aren't fighting for the same things. And we can't even have the conversation about it because your perception of the world has been so protected, right? Like you have been able to experience this world cocooned in the knowledge that the world will take care of you. Yes. Right? Which is not our reality. As a Black woman, our reality is that not only does the world not want to take care of us, but sometimes our communities don't want to take care of us. Yeah. And so it's interesting because I had this conversation with another Black actress on the podcast, and she said, she's like, it has never been more important for us to fully double down on sisterhood.
Mm,
It's never been more important
mm,
because we have to learn, and we were talking about this in the context of being actors, you're going for the same part and there's so few of them, and you feel like you're pitted against each other. And she's like, no, we have to get out of that mindset. We have to support each other. We have to take care of each other,
mhm.
because it's the only way that we're going to be able to navigate this when, like, other people, even if they wanted to care, they don't even have a point of reference
Yes.
to really care about it.
Yes. I mean, I think something that I got from what you were saying is that it's so cool to me because, okay, so Black women and white women under the umbrella of this example have been put against each other
Mhm.
essentially, and also in positions that are so far apart that there's no understanding. Really,
Yeah,
there
yeah, yeah.
hasn't. But over time, there's been more and more and more education. Whereas, like, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 years ago, it like there's always this perspective like, oh, the black woman's angry, the black woman's angry. But it's like, no, part of this is that there are lots of people, even myself at a point in time, who did not know how to articulate my anger, who don't have the education or the knowledge or the language, really the language
The language, yeah.
how I feel. So I'm enraged, right?
Mm,
And that's
mhm.
all I got. That's all I got. I don't I at that time I don't know how to really dig deep and explain to you where I'm coming from. So, but just look at history, education, when black people got that. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
So you're trying to have this discussion with somebody who may have more experience with you just in language, like
Yeah.
just historically. So now we're at a time period where that's really changed,
Mhm,
and it's
mhm.
still changing, which is really amazing. And that has also given Black women the opportunity to understand each other and the
Yeah.
opportunity to say, look, sis, maybe we're not best friends.
Right,
Maybe we're not even friends,
right, right, right.
but I love you and I support you and I understand you.
Yeah.
And like that's what I feel. And that's what I got from doing the Black Girl Ohm and being introduced to that Black Girl I Ohm is like, did this girl just make something for me? Oh,
Did she
okay.
just
Shoot.
see me and do something just for me?
Girl, did you say breathe and I needed it? Oh, yes, you did. I was like, yes, you did. But it's like, and it sounds so simple, but it's so important and so relevant. And that sisterhood is what gives us the opportunity to help a sister out when people don't understand her and when
Yes.
she doesn't have the language to articulate how she feels and what she's going through.
What you're saying, I love so, so much, because I actually think that this is where part of the breakdown is happening. Because, I've had these conversations with some of my white friends, and one of the things that I do love is that by virtue of the fact that we have a relationship, they are able to be honest in a way that, like, actually helps me understand what they're thinking, how they're navigating this, which is the only way you can actually grow and, like, move forward. So, like,
Yeah.
that's like points in the right direction. But
Yeah.
I do think that there has been sort of this general sense of, like, they they're shocked by ugly how ugly this all is. Like, they know, and I mean the response, the anger, the rage,
Mhm.
how deep it is. And something that you just said, I think, is so key to it, which is, it's not that the rage is new, it's that we have language for it now.
Mhm.
And because we have language, and I would even couple on top of that, we have platform for
Yes.
it now,
Yes.
right? Like, now, not only because I think we had language, but we were talking to each other
Yes.
about it, right? Like, this is what would happen in, like, the corner of an audition room, or, like, on Black Twitter, or like whatever. Like, we were having those conversations, but now there's a platform. Take social media, take all of these places, and then the amplification of that has been enough where people are like, oh, I didn't realize the depth of what you were feeling. And it's not so much that I've been willfully ignoring your experience, but I was protected from it, right? Like, I didn't have to be in the trenches with you. And I think there's been so much visibility, and the narratives have been so amplified that, like, you can't escape it.
Yeah. It's as you can tell, it's so hard for me to even hear that. Like to
Mhm.
hear that it's not that I was willfully ignoring your experience.
Mm.
It's hard. I don't like it.
Yeah. Do you disagree? Do you think that
No, I mean, I actually don't because I can understand how that can happen. I think that why the reason I don't like it so much and why I just like, yeah, it feels gross is because you are that only happens because of fucking education. That is why that happens. That
Mhm.
happens because people are not taught the truth and they are
Yeah.
not taught it adequately enough and specifically enough. That
Mhm.
is why I'm like, oh, y'all want to know why everybody can go to the gynecologist and feel kind of okay about their experience? Because let's be real, it's only kind of okay.
Right, right.
Um,
It's never
and
great.
but it's because some dude was like, hey, let me go get all these black women and let me do some explorations and some testing and figure out how I can help women,
Right,
I guess, or white women or whatever. You know
right.
what I mean? So that's what makes me feel icky about that
You
because
know, I
it's all there though.
it's there, and it's interesting because I cannot remember who said it, but someone said it and they articulated it much better than I probably am about to. But it's interesting because the people who are not minorities, I'm going to use that as the term because I think this applies to immigrants. I think this applies to anyone who checks that box that is outside of like white American,
Mhm.
the perceived norm of this country.
Yeah.
I think that we, by product of who we are, have to be fully educated about everyone's history.
Yeah.
We can't survive and not know the white experience, the brown experience, the black experience. Whereas white communities can absolutely navigate the world and not know anything about us or our history. Like it will not slow down their career trajectory. It will not create discomfort in their everyday life. Like we have to, and we hear comedians talk about all the time how, we're bilingual. We know like how to, we know how to speak, white America. We know how to speak black America. But the historical truth behind that is like, we have to know.
Yeah.
We cannot navigate the world and not know that. And so it's interesting because so many people live in a reality where like I don't have to know your story in order to live my life to the fullest. It won't create discomfort for me
Mhm.
to not know your experience. It will not stop my family growth, my economic growth, which I think is the big piece, right?
Yeah.
Like I can still attain wealth and success in this country and never really have to think about you or your experience,
Yeah.
which is what puts this conversation at a pause, like a historical pause.
Yeah. Which is why I'm so hurt by it.
Yeah,
Which is why I'm so hurt by
it's
it
so hurtful.
because because the thing, like you said, the things are it is it's money and it's safety.
Mhm.
That's what it is. And so I think that's why it hurts so much
Yeah.
because it really just hurts to know it hurts to know that somebody could just make it through life and
Mhm.
have like this great life
Yeah.
and never have to look at that. And I go to the subway, I go to an audition, I go to the bank, I go to the coffee shop, I go to H&M or wherever, and I can be five different people,
Yeah. Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
That- like that that's the world.
That's the reality,
Yeah,
right?
that's my reality. It's like when I was little and my mom used to like go into the bank and bring us into the bank, and she would like get this voice, and I was like, "What
Like, who is
what is she doing? Who
that?
are you?" But I mean, that's the reality. So it's like this, like you said, this is a part of the uncomfortable conversations. This is me saying instead of being angry, this is where I have to be like, instead of being angry, I have to let down my guard. And I need
Mhm.
to be if I like I want to be open to
Mhm.
what that person's experience has been and to to hear, to listen, and to share. Um, yeah, it's hard.
Well,
That's hard.
the thing that I think about when you say that is that to have these conversations, both in our personal life and in our professional life, the other part that I think is really uniquely difficult about it is that you know before you start the conversation that it's going to make people uncomfortable. You
Yeah.
know that it's going to it there's no way that it can't put a strain or shine a light on the relationship, on the level of expectation. And I'm wondering for you, how have you navigated this specifically professionally? Because, when you're in this creative space, so much of what we do is banked on reputation, right? Like you want to be liked. It's important that people think that you are easy to work with and you're fun, and that's all of the things that we wear as our like mask in order to be marketable and to be
Mhm.
to be seen as someone that is castable and all of those things. And yet we're coming to a place where you can't not have these conversations.
Yes.
So how are you balancing that? Is that something that you are actually in the place of? Like, are you already there sort of feeling like you can have those conversations and navigate that?
Um, I mean, I feel like it's a couple of things. I would say, and this might sound, very like meditative, but I would say that the first thing that I think I did before all of this, before realizing that completely, is just coming into myself. Um, because I think that one thing that's very important, which is something I just touched on, uh, which has to do with being myself as a Black woman, Ashley, in all of the circles and rooms that I'm in.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that that is definitely one of the first things, right? Because part of the issue, part of the thing is like we do put on these masks and
Mhm.
we do put on this like false representation. Like that's basic psychology. Is like everybody wears a mask and blah blah blah. But like for black people, people of color, that's an added layer.
Yeah.
Um, but for Black people, it's very specific. So I think that's been a part of it. Like this might sound cheesy, but my natural hair journey is a part of that. Coming into myself and feeling really comfortable with my body, with the way that I want to dress, with the way that I want to wear my jewelry, the way that I speak, the music that I listen to, the books that I read. I think all of that was the first steps to that. And then I think, with the industry, and it all depends on where you are in your career, there's something to, there's something so important about doing that and being comfortable bringing that person into the room, letting that person be your headshot, letting that
Yeah.
hair be the hair in your headshot. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like if you like I booked and then the beautiful thing in that too is you can really find support. Like I did a photo shoot I think at the end of last year, and I'm sorry.
It's all right.
Okay. I did a photo shoot at the end of last year, and the woman who was doing my hair was a white woman, and I came with my hair freshly done in a twist out. So we just took it down and it was done. Like it
Mhm.
was like who I am, who I present myself as a model, and I was like, we're prepared. And I went in there, took my hair down. She went over to production, and they were like, "So we want you to straighten her hair." And she looked back at me and looked at them and was like, "Absolutely not."
Wow.
And she was like, "That girl has her hair done." She has a whole bunch of stuff. Like, she was just like, "Absolutely not."
Yeah.
And then she walked back over to me and she was like, "Listen, they want me to straighten your hair." And I told them, "No, because your hair is done and I'm not about to mess up your hair because they want me to straighten your hair."
Right, right.
And like, she understood, like, I have all this product in my hair. Like, I'm like, "We've
Yeah,
been friends
exactly.
now. You had to say that before."
Right.
Um,
Like that's a journey we had to take like
yes.
yesterday.
But it's being brave in those instances too, because like I had a conversation recently who's with a Black actress who's a very similar position as I am in my career, who was in a room in a chair with a hairdresser who was just destroying her hair. And it's like coming in, being confident in who you are as a person. Like,
Mhm.
fine, we're actors, we're artists, we're creators, we're all nervous, we're going to be. But being confident with who you are and in present and showing up as that person, because you got to show up as that person in the room when I sit down with my manager and I'm like, "Hey, listen, this is not working."
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And all
The
right,
thing that the thing that I'm taking, it's so funny because it's really the hardest and yet the most important thing that you can do. And I
Yeah.
think you said it, and I don't think it can be said enough, which is doing that first work of like really coming into this is who I am,
Yeah.
right? Like, and to be fair, and I think for everyone who's listening, we have to acknowledge that like who you are is specific to you, right? Like there is no checkbox for like black, right?
Yeah.
We know that the industry has all of these categories for
How it's
everyone.
done. Yeah.
You know, we know that that's the business side of it, but like there is no one definition for black. So you have to understand like who am I? What is that manifestation for Brietta, right? How do I show up as my full authentic self?
Yeah.
And then I think to your point, and you said it, and when you said it, I was like, I'm going to be thinking about this for like the next week, which is like, then it's about being brave enough to bring that person into the room every single time.
Every time.
Like bring that person, and there is an inclination to want to lessen, shift, change, because you know auditioning is like weird and scary in and of itself. Like being seen and judged is like a weird scary thing that's just a normal part of our business.
Yeah.
But the courage to walk into any room and just know that like this is me, and I can walk away from this experience knowing that they really saw me,
Yeah.
which is not easy to do, but like is should be the goal.
Yes, because and it's so funny because this really ties into I know what everybody hears in acting school that like the part is for you, it's for you, and the authentic self, the narrative. But on top of all of that, like as a black woman, as a black man, and especially black woman, because I know that we go through it with our hair.
Hmm.
Just you know, deciding like this is who I am.
Yep.
This is what my hair looks like. Is it flexible? Yes. If it's not for you, no,
Right.
fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And bringing that person into every room, into every phone call that you have with your agents, into renegotiating your contract and being confident to say, hey, look, I would, this is what I'd rather do. This is what,
Yeah.
and it's hard because overall, all creators, all artists are like very nervous because we just want the opportunity. We want the
Yeah.
job.
And
And
we
so,
want the job, we want to be a part of the industry,
yes,
and we're afraid. And I think that this is a particular nuance to those who are in the creative field. I think the only thing that probably is similar to this from an actor perspective are like models, which is like you're very afraid to say no to someone in those moments, thinking that like if that relationship is severed, like I'll, you know, we all have that moment where we're like, well, that's it, I'll never work with that person again, or like they hated me, and like that's never going to happen. And I think that there is a way for us to be comfortable with showing up fully as who we are. And I think the more comfortable you are with who you are, the less contentious that has to be, right? Like it doesn't have to be like this big line in the sand.
no,
It can just sort of be like, this is who I am, right? Like these are the things that are like non sequitur. Like I won't do this. Like this is how I want to look. This is how I want to be seen. And it even translates into, and I was talking to someone else about this the other day, it translates into the roles that we're willing to be submitted for, the
yeah,
roles that we're willing to accept.
what you're
It's
willing to
like I don't want to perpetuate this stereotype. I don't want to be boxed in. Like being authentic means having the courage to say, this is how I want to navigate this industry.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's 100% it. And the crazy thing about it is I think that it probably almost has nothing to do with your talent. I
Right.
think that it has which is hard to swallow, right? Because
Yeah,
you
yeah,
spend
yeah.
so much time or your craft. You spend so much time working on that and you're like, this is it, I've got to get this right.
Hmm.
But what I have discovered recently and what I have been doing recently is really just working on myself. As you can obviously tell, I'm sure by now, is that I tend to read specific kinds of books. And I've been reading this book called Mindset by, I think it's Carol Dweck. And it's just been really amazing and expansive in terms of the way that I process my achievements and my
Mm.
my quote unquote success, which has a lot to do. and it's very connected to the way that I feel about myself, and then backwards connected to myself, my like worth, being worthy,
Right.
um, and then linking all of that to owning who I am as a person authentically, and bringing that into every single room. And that's a lot, but it can start as small as saying, as like somebody giving you a compliment and you taking it.
Yeah. Yes, which is something that I work on all the time. And it's funny because I have this conversation with my mom all the time. I'm like, I know that I'm having growth in those areas because I don't have such a violent knee-jerk reaction to someone saying like someone says you're beautiful and I'm like, "Oh my God, please." Like, just stop, don't look at me ever. And then so you feel like you're making growth in those areas, but I do think that to be seen is such a vulnerable thing.
Oh
You know
yeah.
what I mean? And it's one of the things that I say about people that I have in my life. It's like, to me, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole because I feel very passionate about this, but like
Yes.
relationship and friendship and this idea of having relationship with someone means that I'm willing to be vulnerable enough with you to be seen by you, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm going to let you see everything about me.
Hmm.
And that means, the risk of you seeing the parts of myself that I'm not like in love with, you know what I mean? And so I think that this idea of knowing yourself, it was interesting when you talked about the book that you're reading, Mindset, and really sort of how you process your life. To me, there seems to be such a seamless tie between that and like actually taking care of yourself. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
nurturing yourself in
Yes.
the fullest sense of the word. And I know that you're someone who is passionate about wellness and well-being, but like how are you do you read those books as sort of part of your like wellness package? Like is that part of the way you're like taking care of yourself? Because I'm always looking for tips on how
Okay.
on how to be a little bit more caring and loving to myself.
I love that. I think that my journey into books like that had a like my journey into Black feminist theory and contemporary theory had a lot to do with just learning about myself and giving myself language to express my experience,
Hmm.
and also giving myself an opportunity to learn history.
Yeah.
Uh, but books like that, I think, I would say yes and no. I think I definitely do get into like I listened to books too on Audible, and I was listening to Daring Greatly, Brene Brown's book,
Hmm.
and it was very it's also part of my wellness experience. Like listening to it is like sort of like the feel good of like, hot chocolate going
Yeah,
down.
yeah, yeah,
Um
yeah.
but I also really try to take note of very poignant things,
Mm,
things that like make me spark inside of me. Um, and and I think I think one of the things that we can do for ourselves is uh, creating like I explained to one of my friends once. I was like, I stopped making lists, and I was like, so if there were like things, if there was like 10 things I would love if I did every day, instead of making it in a list, I started making it in a circle,
mm.
because then it all felt equal to me on the page.
I love that.
So these like types of books are for me are like I can take something small and tangible from them. Like I can take very small that I if someone gives me a compliment, instead of shying away and be like, "Oh my god, no, my hair's a mess." I can just even if I feel that, just the act of saying thank you is
Yeah.
is the beginning of a change. Um,
Mm.
which is what we're talking about. We're talking about developing like your confidence and your self-worth. And so these books, that's what they do for me. Like one of my favorites is Big Magic, which just like touched my heart reading that book, because it gave me so much as an artist, of lack of responsibility and responsibility.
Wow. Yeah.
Um,
I've heard so many people talk about this book, and quite honestly, I may even own it and just have not read it. So
Yeah.
literally while you were saying that, I was like, nope, I'm going to read it. Like, no excuse. I'm going to read it.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so they definitely are part of my self-care and my wellness journey. And I do try to take very specific things out of them. Like I wish I can't remember this writer's name, but she's really good friends with I think it's Elaine. I can't say her last name. She
Hmm.
was like the editor in chief of like online Vogue. But I can't remember her name. But anyway, it's this really amazing book full of these quotes that she wrote, and like things like that. Just like having a book full of quotes that I can open up and flip through, and maybe something has nothing to do with how I'm feeling, but then maybe something does. Um, and I think a lot of like all in all, a lot of what I do has to do with checking in.
Yeah.
Um, and really small changes. Like one of the small changes I think I made years ago was to stop saying sorry to people.
Right.
I was just like, I can't. I cannot do it because we're so just fit create. We're just it's in us to say sorry
Yes.
for things that have nothing to do with what
Nothing,
I've done.
like we literally did nothing wrong, and
Yeah,
we're apologizing, and truthfully we're just apologizing for like being in the space. It's like
yeah,
it's not because we did anything. We're just like, I'm sorry, I'm here.
yes. And with all that, I think like I'm pretty big on meditation. I think that you definitely have to find meditation that works for you because there's
Yeah.
so many different kinds and there's just so many different options. But I mean, if you haven't meditated, I would totally start by trying out Black Girl in Home because that was amazing. And journaling. I
Yeah.
think I try to journal pretty much every day, as like at the beginning of my day. And if it's like if I feel like it, I'll journal and then meditate. Basically, also, I will say I really try to work on how I speak to myself.
Oh, you've tipped into things that are on my list
Yeah,
because that self-narrative part is like key. And it's actually, I think, one of the things that I on that, and I'll let you take this, but I think one of the things that I have been learning about self-talk is before even trying to like quote fix it or address it, it's just being awake and aware of it. Like really just listening to the things that you're saying to yourself
mhm,
is so important because it one of the things that it taught me is that there is this disconnect between how you think you're perceiving yourself versus how you actually are perceiving yourself, because your self-talk is really coming from that deep part of you. And when you listen to it, you're like, oh, there's some stuff there that I
yeah.
need to unpack and explore.
Yes. Yes, I agree 100%. I think one of this might not work for everybody, but one of the easiest ways I think you can start trying to do that is by like one just being open in terms of awareness. And I think once you get to the point where you are aware, the next thing would be to like, if you have a niece or a nephew or a child in your life in some capacity, is to think, what would you say to that child if they said that about themselves in front of you?
Yeah, that's good.
Um, because I like, I don't know, people may have kids, may not in life, but I do think if your plan is to have children and to become a parent, you have you have to look at who you are as a
Mhm.
person first, because
Yes,
that's what will you'll extrovert when you have children. Even if you're trying to raise like these human beings who are super conscious and super confident, what you have will affect them and they will get that.
totally.
So that's sort of my like that's something very recent that I've realized and been thinking about is how like and I know I have a radar on for like physical criticism, like when people criticize their physical body.
Mhm.
And and so like if somebody says something, I'm just like hold on,
You
hold on.
Oh my God. It's so funny you're saying that because I actually just started this practice recently within the past month, which is I remember I had this conversation where I was like, I'm no longer going to let people have narrative about my body, good or bad. good or
Yes.
bad. Like,
Yes.
I don't want people telling me, oh, you've lost weight, you look so great, or
Yeah.
like any of that stuff. I remember I had a conversation with a very dear friend of mine who I love, and she loves me, and like we're soul sisters. But I had this conversation with her. I said, I don't think you understand my relationship with like physical body, and how I identify with that. And even when you're saying something positive, it's actually not good for me. You know what I mean? Like, because it makes me too aware of how my body is being perceived. And, again, because she's the loveliest of people, she's like, I hear that and I receive that. And like, she's like, and I don't love you or hate you because of your body. It's you. But I think taking some ownership over that has been something that I've been doing for my personal wellness, like recognizing that I own my body, like I have agency over it, and to
Mhm.
not let people sort of feel like they can have an opinion about that.
Yes. Yes. I love that so much because I think a lot of us have made mistakes in commenting on other people's bodies. And I personally have. And that moment when that happened has always stuck with me. And what you're saying is I think exactly the experience that was had by that other person. Um, and I think that I am this way about my hair.
Mm,
And I think I'm this way about my hair with people I do not know.
yeah.
I should say, especially with people I do not know, because very often I have spent a lot of time as a childcare provider in the past, and I used to watch this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful black girl, and she had like without stereotypes and with trying to not say this incorrectly, she just had the hair that all of us want. Like
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
know
I know.
all of us,
Right,
like
right,
men,
right.
women, like we all want it.
Right.
And that's what she had. And it was just beautiful. And I remember we were out this one particular day, and this man who was probably like 72 came across the room to us
Hmm.
to tell her how beautiful she was. He was a white man. And I was like, we're going to go.
Yep.
And because I was like, I cannot process why you thought it was so important for you to tell her this.
Hmm.
I don't think you realize how irrelevant you are in
Yes.
this situation.
Yes.
I don't like that you thought that it was okay for you to come across like an indoor market
Right.
packed full of people to
Right.
tell us that.
And
No.
it's so interesting because I think that this idea of understanding, your own self-worth. I was literally just having this conversation yesterday about this idea of loving yourself really means that you take care of yourself to the fullest extent, which
Yes.
means, and I was saying to this other person, I was like, it's this idea of being your own parent. And I think you articulated this before, which is like, I protecting myself from the people, the things, and the words that
Mhm.
are either triggering me or are not loving me to the fullest extent.
Yeah.
And that's about being, but it goes back to that idea about really being self-empowered to know that it's okay to say to people that, like, with all respect, like, you've reached a boundary for me. You can't address my person or my body or whatever.
And I mean, I think the thing is that not funny, the cool thing is, I think for me, I feel even further empowered now because whereas in the past, I stood in an elevator with that same child with a white woman who was probably in her 55, 60s, who in a very strange way commented on this little girl's hair.
Hmm.
And I was standing next to her, and the little girl, she's like the sweetest person on the planet. So she was like she'll hold the door for like 72 people to walk through and like keep
Right.
holding the door.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that's
yeah.
how sweet and kind she is. And she, says thank you. And I'm standing there just like standing next to this woman. And then she looks at me and she looks at my hair and she goes, "Oh, your hair's really nice too." And
Mm,
I just looked at her and I
yeah,
looked away and I didn't say anything. And that was my way of dealing with those situations is like,
totally.
I'm not going to give you anything for this
Right.
moment, even though obviously I'm giving something, but like I have no words.
Right, right,
Um,
right. I
and I've
won't honor that. I'm not going to
yeah,
honor your opinion.
yes. And now I think now I feel even more comfortable explaining why I'm not going to.
Yes, that's so good. I love that because I think that the more you do that work of understanding yourself,
Yeah.
really accepting yourself fully and authentically, the more you become empowered and have language around the way you want to navigate the world, which I think is like,
Mhm.
that's the thing, right? Like, that's the thing that we're all trying to figure out is like, how do I want to navigate this world?
Yeah.
How do I want to show up? How do I want to live my life to the fullest? What does living my life authentically look like for me? And I think one of the things that you say that I completely resonate with is that, and I think it's a byproduct of a lot of things. I think as you get older, as you have more experiences, you get more comfortable with
Yeah.
saying, no, this is how my body and my spirit should be treated.
Yeah.
And doing that, it helps you sort of like combat what can be a very brutal world, right? Like,
Yeah.
you have this way about the way you're dealing with yourself that kind of puts up this barrier so that the world doesn't get a chance to be as cruel to you as it could be.
Yes, and I think that that's okay. I really do. I think that's the other thing is I think there would potentially be people to challenge that idea, but I think that there's nothing wrong with protecting yourself in
Mm,
certain ways. I do think like obviously like we all have different experiences, and sometimes we have experiences that cause us to go to the extreme, which are totally valid. But I think like you said, it's a lot of it has to do with learning about yourself.
yeah.
Like I have always been, this is so funny. I don't know if it's funny, but it is to me. But I have always been the person like that, like, I don't give a fuck what you think about what I'm wearing
Right.
ever. And like so much so, I was like really young in Vegas with some friends, and we all were like, let's go buy dresses because we're gonna go out tonight. We go to this store, everyone picks a dress, and I picked this green dress with like these long sleeves, and the sleeves are like slit and see-through and like flowing. And I loved this dress. They all hated it.
Mm,
All of them. It was like four other women. They all hated it. And I was like, I love this dress. I love
yeah.
it. And I'm fucking wearing it tonight. And I did. And I looked great, by the way.
Right.
I'm saying I
Exactly.
looked great. But like I've always had that thing for
Right.
whatever reason. And I mean, we all have like different things.
Hmm.
Um, it is this process of like learning about yourself as a person. Um, and darn, I almost had her name. Her name was, I thought it was Chloe something. I'll figure it out. But
Hmm.
anyway, learning about yourself as a person and then saying, okay, great, like where do I feel? How do I feel about this thing? Like how do I feel about my hair? How do I feel about my skin?
Yeah.
Um, I get so many I get so many compliments about my skin. And very often those compliments come at me from a perspective that has the undertone of, "Hey, can you compliment me back?
Yeah. Interesting. Right.
Can you bring yourself down a few notches
Hmm.
and compliment me back?"
Yeah.
And I really don't like it so much so. This might be a little extreme to some people, but once I was complimented on my skin and had a whole conversation, or before the whole conversation could happen, compliment, and I was like, well, I got nice skin. I got nice skin. You didn't. I got slavery. You didn't.
Tomato, tomato. How do we
Yeah,
weigh
and it
this
was
thing
like
out?
the woman who's like now a really good friend of mine was like, yep.
Yep.
And I was like,
Hmm.
exactly,
Right.
exactly. Stop doing that. Stop
Yeah.
talking to me about my skin so that you can feel better about your skin's aging. Like it's so weird. And
It's a
there's so many,
weird thing that we
yeah,
do to ourselves and that we do to other people. But something that you just said that I think is such a good place for people to sort of like, if you're thinking about what can I take away from this that's like actionable and practical, doing this self work will help you to understand yourself, which is important, but then by product of that, understand how you feel about what's happening in the world around you. Like, it's very difficult to understand how you feel about, the world and where we are and what's happening socially and politically and globally. It's hard to think about that when you don't even know sort of like how you feel sitting in your own body. And I think that if someone was thinking, what's my first work that I should be doing, it always goes back to the individual, right? Like it always goes back to doing that self work.
Yes, 100%. Like self-work and just starting with one specific thing. And
Yeah.
that could be for a lot of women, that could be saying sorry.
Yep.
You know,
Like
for a lot
that
of
could be
women,
the thing that you work
that
on.
could be your starting point. And then for a lot of women, it could be like listening to your own self-talk. Like, you
Hmm.
know, those are two places. And then if you're having trouble, like read books. Like there's some beautiful, hilarious books out there. And the book I was trying to remember is written by Chloe Wade. I don't remember
Mm.
the name of the book, but it's by Chloe Wade, CLEO. And it's a book full of these quotes that she's written, and it's a beautiful book.
I love that. I think that you are such an amazing individual, Ashley. I think that as was our first conversation, you and I could talk forever
Yes.
because I love the fact that you're so thoughtful and genuine about the way that you approach relationship with other people. And I think that that's the thing that I'm always drawn to. I'm always just like, I want people to be genuine and authentic when I'm dealing with them, because I try desperately to bring that to other people. So I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast today. You're such a lovely person. I'm so appreciative. And tell people where they can find you. Are you on Instagram, website, all of that stuff?
I'm basically on Instagram. So my Instagram is at Ashley Versher. It's V as in Victor, Ersher. I never go on my Facebook until my husband tells me that I have like a lot of messages I should go read. Um, and I do have a website. It's www.ashleyversher.com, and it's my acting jam stuff is on there.
Well, we'll make sure to have everything linked in the description for this particular episode. Thank you again, Ashley, for being a part of this podcast. I hope that everyone has taken away from this conversation what I have, which is I feel joyful. There's some joy that I feel leaving this conversation, because to me, there's nothing more important than like connection and creating community. And as you bring more and more people into your community and into your tribe, it just expands your life and brings so much happiness and joy. And so I feel so privileged to have had you on the podcast today. For everyone who's listening, I hope that this episode has done exactly what I always endeavor it to do, which is to make you think and feel more deeply. And if nothing else, it was just a positive moment in the middle of your day. I can't wait to bring someone else back to the platform. But in the meantime, you all have an amazing, amazing day. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.